I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the seating arrangement. The long dining tables stretched across the backyard like a stage, with crisp white tablecloths and silver cutlery catching the late afternoon sun. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting gentle golden pools of light, but none of it made the tension any softer. My husband and I were placed at the far end of the table, near the folding chairs, a small distance from his parents and his older brother, who sat surrounded by laughter, attention, and obvious admiration. I noticed the subtle cues immediately, the way his mother's shoulders were squared in pride, how his father leaned slightly forward whenever the eldest son spoke, how the younger cousins lingered near them, hanging on every word. It was a display, and we were clearly not part of it. I smiled anyway. I had learned to do that early in our marriage. It was a mask that shielded both of us, a small act of defiance in the face of expectations that were never ours to meet. My husband reached for my hand under the table. His fingers were warm but tense, pressing tightly against mine. He had been out of the family business for nearly 2 years, not because he failed, not because he wasn't talented. He had walked away when he realized that continuing there would mean betraying himself, compromising his morals and dignity for profit and approval. That choice had earned him their quiet scorn, the kind that could slice through a room without a single raised voice. And now here we were. His mother leaned toward a cluster of relatives, her laughter bright, slightly too sharp. Well, at least one of my sons knows how to make a real name for himself, she said, nodding toward her golden child. My husband's brother, who accepted the praise with a practiced smile, like oxygen, had just been handed to him. I could feel the sting of humiliation in my husband's jaw tightening. I wanted to tell everyone the truth, the nights he had spent working quietly, the deals he had saved, the consulting contracts he had closed anonymously, all to protect the family legacy he no longer belonged to, but I didn't. There was no audience for truth tonight, only judgment, and it was already cast. An aunt leaned in toward a cousin and muttered, "Must be nice to have time off. Some people just don't like responsibility." The words hung in the air, a gentle, casual cruelty. My husband's lips pressed into a thin line. I squeezed his hand again, letting him know silently that I was here. We didn't need to speak. I observed everyone the subtle eye rolls, the almost imperceptible smirks, the way praise was doled out selectively, carefully. I noticed the way his younger cousins whispered under their breath, laughing softly at jokes I didn't fully hear but understood immediately. I could see the implicit hierarchy, the invisible lines drawn between success and failure, and the way my husband was carefully placed just outside it. I wanted to speak, to defend him. I wanted to describe the countless nights I had watched him work, the creative solutions he had developed quietly, the projects he had guided successfully without a single thank you. I wanted the world to see that the man sitting beside me wasn't unemployed. He was unrecognized and unappreciated. But I didn't, not yet. I had learned long ago that in moments like this, words could inflame instead of enlighten. That anger often revealed weakness, while silence preserved power, and I had power, quiet, steady, patient power, the kind that waits for the right moment to be revealed. So I smiled. I adjusted my posture, straightened my shoulders, and nodded politely at passing relatives who offered false compliments or silent pity. Each hello and how are you was measured, carefully delivered. The mask was perfect, and I reminded myself that a mask could be stronger than a sword. Meanwhile, my husband's brother laughed at a joke I didn't understand and received claps on the shoulder. The attention seemed effortless, as though the world itself had ordained him to this place of approval. I noticed my husband glance down at his plate, quietly, his chest tight, his hands clenched slightly. I wanted to tell him that he didn't need their applause to validate him, but I knew he already understood. He always did. As the dinner progressed, I observed the details, the way his mother's eyes sparkled when recounting her eldest son's successes, the way his father's hand rested on the chair, guiding attention to where it mattered most. Every laugh, every whispered comment, every subtle gesture reinforced the same narrative. My husband was a disappointment. And I realized the moment would come when I had to decide whether to accept it quietly or to rewrite the story entirely. But for now, I waited, I smiled, and I learned to wear that smile like armor, hiding the deep, slow-burning pain in my chest. It wasn't bitterness yet. It was observation. It was patience. It was knowing in my heart that the truth, our truth, was stronger than their approval. And in that moment, sitting quietly at the edge of the stage, I made a silent vow. One day, this mask would not just hide me. It would reveal everything they had refused to see. After dinner, the chatter began to fade as the sun sank lower, leaving only soft shadows and the faint glow of lanterns. Everyone instinctively sensed the shift the moment had arrived. My father, Inlaws, stood, tall and deliberate, tapping his glass with a silver fork. The clinking sound cut through the polite murmurs like a starting gun. Conversations paused mid-laugh, utensils hovered in the air, and even the children looked up, sensing the gravity of what was coming. "We have an announcement," he said, voice calm but firm. "It's time we made clear who will carry on the family legacy." I felt my husband's hand stiffen around mine. He didn't squeeze. He didn't flinch. He just remained quiet, as he often did when facing these moments, steady, composed, and almost invisible. I wondered if he had already predicted the words that were about to fall. His mother leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation, clearly thrilled to be the one delivering the long-awaited revelation. Her smile was carefully rehearsed, perfect in its charm, yet underneath I could detect a spark of triumph, a satisfaction in finally putting everyone in their place. The other relatives exchanged nods, smiles that were polite on the surface, but held subtle notes of excitement, curiosity, and judgment. His father continued, praising the qualities he deemed essential for carrying the business forward: loyalty, commitment, intelligence, and practical ambition. I listened to each word, noting the pointed subtext behind them. I knew exactly who these traits were meant to describe. I watched my husband's jaw tighten, his knuckles whitening on the tablecloth. Then, finally, it was said, the business. My father-in-law continued, his voice carrying that mixture of authority and finality only he could manage, "will go to our eldest son." The applause came immediately, polite and expected, like a well-rehearsed ceremony. My husband didn't react. He stared at the table, jaw set, eyes focused on the space in front of him, as if the sound and movement were somehow distant, belonging to another room. I, too, remained silent, my lips pressed together in a calm mask that hid the shock and the sting of injustice. Someone leaned toward me and whispered, "I suppose some people just aren't built for success." The words were casual, dripping with cruel judgment. My chest tightened. I forced myself to inhale slowly, the air bitter in my lungs. My husband's eyes flicked toward mine for just a fraction of a second, a silent question in their depths. I wanted to speak. I wanted to remind the room that the man sitting beside me had walked away from wealth, from ease, from opportunities he had no obligation to refuse, simply because he refused to compromise who he was. I wanted to tell them that leaving the family business had required more courage than all their accolades combined. But I didn't, not yet. Instead, I studied them, the parents, the siblings, the cousins, the friends. I watched their faces, their smiles, their satisfied nods. I noticed the subtle pride in their eyes at their perfect plan. I realized in that moment how deep their sense of control ran, how carefully they had scripted this scene, and how firmly they believed in their narrative of success and failure. My husband's brother sat tall, absorbing the applause, clearly aware of the victory but oblivious to the quiet truth behind it. The golden son praised and affirmed, believed he had earned everything, and in their eyes my husband, steady, thoughtful, morally unyielding, was nothing. I looked down at my hands, folded neatly on my lap. My mind raced, not with anger, but with observation, planning, and patience. I had been taught over the years that the loudest words often reveal the least, that true power lies in quiet confidence, and that dignity can be more devastating than confrontation. They had announced their winner, their heir, their rightful successor. They had painted my husband as the failure they had decided he was. And in that moment, I understood that my role was not to argue, to cry, or to seek their approval. My role was to wait, to observe, and to act when the time was right. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, the unspoken judgments, the pity, the scorn. Yet beneath all of it, beneath the hierarchy and the carefully crafted narrative, I felt a quiet strength growing inside me. I had been watching, listening, waiting, and now I knew that the moment to reveal the truth would come. And when it did, it wouldn't be in anger or spectacle. It would be in clarity, in calm, in undeniable reality. For now, though I remained seated, I smiled politely, I nodded as people passed by, clinking glasses and exchanging congratulations. And I made a silent promise to myself. This was not the end of the story, not by a long shot. The announcement had been made. The room had cheered, but history, I knew, is never as simple as applause, and one day the quiet truth would speak louder than all their words combined. The evening air had grown cooler, and the lanterns cast longer shadows over the backyard. Inside, the chatter had dwindled to polite conversations and the occasional clink of cutlery. But for me, the room felt suspended, each smile, each polite nod, each whispered comment carrying a weight I could almost touch. I had not spoken during the inheritance announcement. I had remained seated, calm, observing, letting my husband's family celebrate what they believed to be their victory. It would have been easy to argue, to defend, to demand recognition. But I had learned something crucial over the years. Truth, when revealed at the right moment, is far more powerful than anger or complaint. I took a sip of water, watching my husband quietly push his plate aside. He was composed, as always, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the subtle tightening around his jaw. I knew he was resisting the urge to say something, anything, that might have set off his family's expectations of confrontation. I admired him for it, even as my heart ached at the unfairness of the moment. As the night continued, I observed the details others missed. His mother's eyes sparkled with triumph as she recounted one of the golden son's achievements to a cousin. She didn't realize that in her need to dominate the narrative, she was revealing more than she intended, the depth of her favoritism, the strings she had pulled to maintain control. I noticed the way his father's hand rested lightly on his eldest son's chair, guiding attention toward the heir he preferred, almost as if ensuring no one could forget the hierarchy he had carefully constructed. Meanwhile, the golden son sat proudly, unaware of the quiet truths surrounding him. I knew the business's recent stability, the contracts everyone called miracles, had relied, in part, on work my husband had done quietly behind the scenes. No one knew, no one appreciated it, and no one ever would if we continued to stay silent. I could feel a growing strength in myself, a calm resolve that replaced the sting of humiliation. I realized that silence is not weakness. Silence is observation. Silence is power waiting to be understood. The world may applaud the loud, the flashy, the immediate, but lasting influence belongs to those who understand the art of timing. I noticed small shifts in the room as conversations continued. A cousin leaned closer to another, whispering something that made her laugh, but her eyes flicked toward us. Curiosity mingled with the faintest hint of doubt. Even without words, they began to sense that not everything was as it seemed, and that realization was mine to nurture. I reached for my husband's hand again, brushing my thumb over his knuckles. "It's not over," I whispered, not for them to hear, but for him. He met my gaze briefly, a flicker of understanding and gratitude passing between us. It was a quiet acknowledgement that we were on the same side, that we had always been. Hours passed, the party began to wind down. Guests said their goodbyes, exchanged hugs, and departed, leaving a silence that felt almost sacred. And in that quiet, I allowed myself to reflect. I remembered the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, or told to stay quiet in my own family, in school, in early jobs. Each moment had been a lesson, a preparation for this night. I had learned to endure subtle cruelty, to recognize hidden agendas, and to protect my own sense of self without needing external validation. I realized that patience had become my ally. By remaining calm, by observing, by withholding judgment until the moment was right, I could cultivate understanding and clarity. I did not need to force recognition. I did not need to demand it. Truth has a way of emerging quietly, inevitably, when presented with calm certainty. I finally understood what my silence had taught me, that emotional strength is not in shouting the truth. It is in living it. That dignity is not maintained by confrontation alone, but by the unwavering confidence in one's own integrity. That those who belittle or underestimate you will eventually face the consequences of their own narrow vision. As I sat there, the last of the guests disappearing into the night, I made a mental note of the moment. The moment when patience and quiet observation would lead to action, not rash, not loud, but deliberate and undeniable. The moment when the truth would speak for itself. And I knew, deep down, that the family's carefully constructed hierarchy, their applause, their judgment, it all meant nothing to the reality of what my husband and I had built quietly, ethically. And without their approval, the room was silent, the night was calm, and in that calm I found my own strength, ready to act when the time came. We left the party early, stepping out into the crisp night air. The distant hum of departing cars and faint laughter of lingering guests made the world feel almost dreamlike. My husband didn't speak much in the car. He drove quietly, hands steady on the wheel, his eyes focused straight ahead. I glanced at him, catching the tension that still lingered in his jaw, and reached over to place my hand on his. He gave a slight squeeze in return, a silent thank you for the understanding we shared, the unspoken bond that had only grown stronger over the evening. At home, I finally allowed myself to breathe fully. The mask I had worn all night, the careful smile, the patience, the observation. It could finally slip. But not out of relief, not out of anger, but out of calm clarity. The truth was ours to hold, and it would not require shouting or confrontation to have its effect. The following days passed with a strange quietness. Calls from my in-laws were infrequent, each one polite but carefully neutral, avoiding any mention of the inheritance or the evening's events. I noticed a subtle shift in my husband. He was lighter, more at peace, as if letting go of the weight of unacknowledged accomplishments finally allowed him to stand taller in his own eyes. I realized that this was the power of dignity, the quiet kind, the one that doesn't demand recognition, but insists on it in its own time. My husband and I had walked away from approval, from the accolades that our families deemed essential, and in doing so, we had reclaimed something far more valuable ourselves. One afternoon, about a week later, his mother called. Her voice was careful, measured. She asked for advice about a problem in the family business, one of the recent contracts that had been attributed to her eldest son's genius. I could hear the hesitation in her tone, the unspoken admission that things were not running as smoothly as they appeared during the reunion. I handed the phone to my husband without comment. He listened quietly, his voice calm, professional, and polite. After a moment, he said simply, "I'm not available for that anymore." There was no anger in his tone, only the quiet firmness of someone who knew his worth and refused to compromise it. He hung up, and I saw the release in his shoulders, the relief in his eyes. In that instant, I understood something profound. Justice does not always arrive with dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is invisible. Sometimes it is simply the natural consequence of truth, left unacknowledged until the moment the world is ready to recognize it. And most importantly, it is never about revenge. It is about self-respect. We spent the evening together in our small apartment, sipping tea by the window and letting the night unfold around us. I watched my husband relax, finally allowing himself to let go of the weight of others' judgments, and I thought about the lessons I had learned: patience, observation, silence, dignity. How every insult, every whisper, every look of disapproval had prepared me for this exact moment, the moment where quiet strength triumphs over shallow judgment. The following weeks were filled with subtle signs that our absence and our calm resolve had spoken louder than any argument could have. Business deals we had structured quietly continued to stabilize the company. The Golden Sun, though praised endlessly during the reunion, struggled to maintain control without the expertise my husband had contributed anonymously. And though my in-laws never admitted it, the cracks were visible, small, almost imperceptible, but undeniable to anyone paying attention. For us, there was no celebration, no vindictive declaration. There was only peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your own worth, from holding your head high, from refusing to let others define your value. We didn't inherit the family business, but in truth, we had inherited something far greater: our freedom, our dignity, and our inner strength. I thought back to that long night of applause, judgment, and quiet humiliation. I smiled softly, remembering the mask I had worn, the patience I had practiced, the moments of quiet observation that had built this foundation of strength. The truth, I realized, does not need to be shouted to be heard, and when it finally speaks, it speaks in a voice that cannot be ignored. As I sipped my tea, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Life had taught me that respect is earned not by bending to the expectations of others, but by standing firm in your own truth. Boundaries, patience, and dignity, these were the lessons I carried now, lessons that could never be taken from me. And in that quiet, gentle way, I knew we had already won.